This video is about a sound. The sound of laughter in a boardroom that echoed across the world and, in doing so, signed the death warrant for a global empire. It's the story of how Nokia, the undisputed king of the mobile world, saw the future coming and chose to laugh in its face. This isn't just a business case study. It's a modern tragedy about the fatal poison of arrogance. Picture the scene. The year is 2007. We are inside a sleek conference room in Finland, the heart of Nokia's operations. The men in this room are titans who command nearly half the planet's mobile phone market. On a large screen, they are watching a grainy live stream from California, where a man in a black turtleneck, Steve Jobs, is holding up a strange new device. It has no physical keyboard, its screen is made of glass. And as they watch him demonstrate its features, a wave of relief, followed by outright mockery, fills the room. They started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous chuckle, it was a deep, genuine, dismissive belly laugh. The kind of laugh you have when you know, with absolute certainty, that your opponent has made a catastrophic error. One top executive would later be quoted dismissing the iPhone as a niche product. They saw a fragile toy with a terrible battery, a device that couldn't possibly survive the real world, a world their own indestructible phones had conquered. Their confidence was absolute, built on a foundation of market dominance so complete it seemed unbreakable. But that confidence was a fortress built on sand, and the tide was about to turn with terrifying speed. In this video, we will expose the 3 fatal miscalculations that turned their laughter into a eulogy for their own company. We will reveal the secret projects and prophetic warnings from Nokia's own engineers that were ignored by their leadership for years. And we will uncover the single revolutionary idea behind the iPhone that Nokia's brilliant minds simply could not comprehend until it was far, far too late. If you've ever wondered how an untouchable giant can fall from the sky seemingly overnight, stay with me. Because the most damning evidence isn't found in a financial report, but in the culture of pride that made them completely blind to the revolution they were mocking. That sound of laughter was the sound of an empire choosing to be blind. A moment when the future knocked and Nokia's leaders told it to go away. To truly understand how this giant fell, we need to unlock 3 secrets the official corporate history leaves out. These are the buried evidence of a tragedy years in the making. First, we will pull back the curtain on a project whispered about in tech circles like an urban legend. We'll reveal the ghost in Nokia's own machine, a fully functional, beautifully designed touchscreen smartphone their engineers had created long before the iPhone was ever announced. Imagine a device with a large touch display, a user-friendly interface, and the power to browse the real internet. It existed, not in a Californian garage, but in a secure research lab in Finland. We will show you what it looked like and expose the shocking reason why Nokia's own executives killed it, deeming it too advanced and too risky for their customers. But it gets worse. Next, we will take you inside the closed-door meeting where a lone engineer presented a prophetic report on the rising threat from Apple. He laid out a precise roadmap of how a software-focused company could shatter Nokia's hardware kingdom. He practically begged them to pivot. We'll uncover the cold, dismissive response he received, a response that silenced one of the few voices that could have saved them. And finally, the most damning secret of all. We will expose how Nokia's internal culture had become a brutal civil war. This wasn't healthy competition. It was a corporate Game of Thrones, where brilliant teams were pitted against one another, their funding dependent not just on their own success, but on the failure of their internal rivals. They were so consumed with fighting each other They never saw the real enemy on the horizon. But before we begin the autopsy, let's remember their golden age. For many of us, our first taste of freedom came in one of their devices. So, a quick question. What was your first Nokia phone? The legendary 3310? The business-like 6010? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read about the device that started it all for you. To understand that fatal laughter, we have to go back. Back to a world before apps, before social media, before the internet lived in our pockets. We have to go back to the golden age of Nokia, an era when they were undisputed kings. For many, the memory is tied to the feel of their devices. That distinctive weight, the satisfying click of the physical buttons, and the iconic, pixelated handshake that greeted you when you powered one on. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Nokia's dominance was absolute. At their peak, for every 2 mobile phones sold on the planet, 1 was a Nokia. Their slogan was "Connecting People," and they were the first taste of true mobile freedom. Their phones were cultural icons, symbols of reliability. Think of the Nokia 3310. It wasn't just a phone, it was a legend. The device that could survive anything. The phone that gave us the beautifully simple, endlessly addictive game of Snake. It represented everything Nokia stood for: durability, simplicity, and trust. But here is the detail nostalgia leaves out. Beneath that tough plastic shell, a problem was festering. While the hardware was legendary, the software inside was becoming a tangled mess. The operating system, Symbian, was powerful for its time, but notoriously slow and confusing. To do something simple, you had to navigate a frustrating maze of menus and submenus. It was a test of patience, a clunky experience that stood in contrast to the phone's simple exterior. This clumsiness was a symptom of a deeper disease. Nokia had become a victim of its own success. It was a massive bureaucracy with endless layers of middle management. Every new idea had to pass through a dozen committees where it was debated, diluted, and delayed until it lost all its power. They were an empire of hardware engineers trapped in a corporate structure that prioritized safety over speed. They had built a fortress to protect their kingdom, but in doing so, they had also built their own prison. And it's here that the official history feels like a lie. On the surface, Nokia was an invincible colossus. But from the inside, it was a slow-moving giant, tangled in its own red tape and burdened by software already years out of date. They were comfortable, profitable, and completely blind to the fact that their prison was about to be demolished. Then came January 9, 2007. At the Macworld conference, the air was electric. On stage, Steve Jobs was about to perform his magic. And across the world, in those confident boardrooms in Finland, the titans of Nokia were watching, ready to assess the latest offering from a computer company foolishly playing in their sandbox. Jobs held up a sleek black rectangle and declared he was introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet device. Then the punchline. These weren't 3 separate devices, this was one device. And he called it the iPhone. He swiped his finger, and the digital world responded with a fluidity no one had ever seen. It was an intuitive, magical experience. And back in Finland, the silence was broken by chuckles. Then the chuckles turned into deep, dismissive laughter. Internal reports paint a damning picture of sheer arrogance. A phone without a physical keyboard? Business users will never accept it, one executive declared. Their phones were hammers. This was a delicate piece of jewelry. They listed its flaws like a prosecutor. The battery life was atrocious. It ran on the painfully slow 2G network. It had no memory card slot, no removable battery, and its camera was a joke. And the price? An insult. A luxury toy for a handful of wealthy fans. To the kings of durability and practicality, the iPhone wasn't a threat. It was a beautifully designed, deeply flawed toy. But this is where the story pivots to a Greek tragedy. Nokia's brilliant engineers saw all the individual trees, but completely failed to see the forest. They were so focused on comparing technical specifications, megapixels, battery life, network speed, that they missed the one earth-shattering detail that rendered all of that obsolete. They were judging the hardware, but Apple had changed the game to be about software. This was the point of no return. The future arrived, knocked loudly, and Nokia's leadership laughed and told it to go away. They didn't see a phone, they saw a collection of inferior components. They couldn't comprehend that Apple wasn't selling a device, they were selling a user experience, a pocket-sized magical window to the internet, and people would gladly sacrifice battery life and durability for a taste of that magic. That laughter was the sound of a door slamming shut on the future. It was an active, arrogant rejection of a new reality, simply because it didn't fit their worldview. In that single moment of collective mockery, they sealed their own fate. The laughter in Nokia's boardroom eventually died down, replaced by the cold realization that the iPhone was not going away. And so began their road of trials, a desperate journey to reclaim a future slipping through their fingers. Their response came in 3 agonizing stages. The first was an act of pure hardware arrogance, the Nokia N95. On paper, it was a monster that technically humiliated the iPhone. It had a 5-megapixel camera with a world-class lens, GPS, and 3G high-speed internet. It was the Swiss Army knife of phones, a testament to Nokia's engineering. But the soul of the phone, its software, was the same old clunky Symbian. To use its incredible power, you had to navigate a labyrinth of confusing menus with a tiny directional pad. It was like a brand new Ferrari with the dashboard of a 1920s tractor. The N95 proved that Nokia could still build the best hardware, but it also proved they had learned nothing. They won the battle on the spec sheet, but were losing the war for the user's heart. Their second attempt was a more pathetic response, a poorly made copy. The Nokia 5800 Express Music was their first touchscreen phone, born not from innovation, but from panic. Instead of the iPhone's magical capacitive screen that responded to a light touch, Nokia used an older, cheaper, resistive screen. This meant you couldn't just touch it, you had to physically press it, often with a little plastic stylus. The experience was a nightmare. The screen was unresponsive and frustrating. Actions that were effortless on an iPhone became a chore. It felt like a cheap imitation, a soulless clone that had captured the look of the future, but none of its magic. If you've made it this far, you feel the frustration of watching a giant stumble. Hold on to that, because the real internal betrayal is yet to come. While Nokia was fumbling publicly, a brutal war was raging inside its walls. There were 2 warring tribes. On one side, the old guard, the powerful Symbian team. On the other, a smaller, brilliant team of rebels working on a secret project called MeeGo. It was a beautiful, modern operating system, light years ahead of Symbian, that could have gone head-to-head with iOS. But the Symbian old guard saw MeeGo not as a savior, but as a threat to their power. They actively starved the project of funding and resources. And while Nokia was consumed with tearing itself apart, a silent assassin crept onto the battlefield: Google's Android. It was a free, open-source operating system that manufacturers like Samsung were eagerly adopting. Nokia was so busy fighting itself that it completely missed the real threat. They were arguing over which of their own horses was better, while Google was giving away free cars to all their competitors. But what if this entire picture of incompetence is a misdirection? What if the greatest tragedy wasn't that Nokia failed to build a competitor to the iPhone, but that they had already built one years earlier, and then deliberately murdered it in secret? This is the central, shocking truth. Deep within their R&D labs, as early as 2004, a team of visionary engineers had created a device that was prophetic. Leaked photos tell of a prototype with a large, high-resolution color touchscreen covering its entire face. It featured an interface based on direct touch icons and could browse the full internet. Think about that. This was years before Steve Jobs stood on that stage. Nokia's own engineers had already created the blueprint for the modern smartphone. They presented this vision to the executives, the men who had built an empire on cheap phones with physical buttons. And the response was not excitement. It was pure, bottom-line fear. The device was deemed far too expensive to produce at scale. The profit margins would be razor-thin compared to the cash cows they were selling by the tens of millions. They believed it was too fragile, too radical for their customers who expected a phone to be a hammer, not a pane of glass. But the real reason was more damning. This prototype was a Trojan horse that would destroy their own business model. It was a software-centric device, a handheld computer, and Nokia was a hardware company. To embrace this future would mean admitting their entire identity was obsolete. It meant cannibalizing their own best-selling products. So they made a choice. They didn't just shelve the project, they buried it. They locked the future in a vault and pretended it never existed, choosing guaranteed profit today over the terrifying risk of leading a revolution tomorrow. The popular narrative is that Nokia was a slow dinosaur, too blind to see the meteorite coming. That's a lie. The truth is more tragic. Nokia wasn't blind. They were the astronomers who discovered the meteorite first. They saw the future with perfect clarity because they had invented it. And then, out of fear, they chose to look away. We now arrive at the darkest point. The year is 2011. The laughter is a distant, mocking echo. Inside Nokia's headquarters, the sales charts are a bloody red waterfall, a vertical drop into oblivion. The company was in a state of absolute freefall. It was here that the new CEO, Stephen Elop, published his infamous Burning Platform memo. He told the story of a man on an oil platform that's on fire. He has a choice: stay and burn, or jump into the icy waters below. The message was brutally clear. The burning platform was Nokia. It was a public confession that the company was on fire, and every path forward seemed to lead to death. But what came next was not a rescue plan. It was an unconditional surrender. Faced with the choice of jumping, Nokia had two options. They could jump toward their own creation, MeeGo, their last best hope, or they could jump toward safety and adopt Android. They did neither. In a move that still baffles analysts, they chose to jump into the arms of Microsoft. tying their entire future to the unproven, unpopular, and flawed Windows Phone operating system. This was the final, fatal act. By signing an exclusive deal with Microsoft, Nokia wasn't just choosing a partner, it was setting fire to its own lifeboats. They abandoned MeeGo, telling their most brilliant engineers their work was worthless. They were so afraid of becoming another Android manufacturer that they chose to become a hardware factory for a company that had consistently failed in mobile. It was the end of the line. The surrender was complete. The partnership was an anchor. The world was introduced to the Lumia phones. They were beautiful, clad in vibrant shells, a final flash of Nokia's design genius. But they were ghost towns. The problem was the app gap. All the apps that were making smartphones essential, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, were being built for iPhone and Android first, and for Windows Phone, maybe never. It was a beautiful house with no furniture, a death spiral. And this is where the final confrontation took place, Nokia versus reality. Reality doesn't care about your glorious history. It only cares about what people want right now. Nokia believed its name was an unbreakable shield, but reality showed them that the brand on the outside means nothing if the experience on the inside is empty. The ecosystem, that universe of apps, had become the new king, and Nokia had no kingdom. The end came in 2013. Microsoft, their supposed savior, became their undertaker, buying Nokia's mobile division for just over $7 billion. At its peak, Nokia's value was over $150 billion. The Finnish giant sold its crown jewels for pennies on the dollar. The king was dead. So now we can assemble the final pieces. The answers were hidden inside Nokia's own walls. First, that ghost in the machine, the touchscreen prototype from 2004. This was the original crime. They killed it not because it was a bad product, but because it was too good, too disruptive. It threatened their comfortable business model. It was an act of corporate self-preservation that became corporate suicide. But murdering a product is one thing. Silencing a profit is another. In mid-2007, a senior designer begged for a meeting with executives. He laid out a presentation showing that the iPhone's user experience was the real threat, not its hardware. He warned them that people would forgive a bad battery for a great experience, but never forgive a bad experience for a great battery. The response was cold laughter. One executive reportedly said, "We have 100 user interface experts. We don't need lessons from a computer company." He wasn't just ignored, he was ridiculed. And that arrogance fueled the final wound, the internal civil war. MeeGo could have been their salvation, but Nokia's internal structure made its success impossible. The Symbian division was the old kingdom with all the money. The MeeGo team were the underfunded rebels. Instead of uniting against Apple and Google, Symbian executives actively sabotaged MeeGo, blocking funding and poaching its engineers. They preferred to let the company burn rather than surrender their own power. And there it is, the complete truth. A tragedy in 3 acts. They had the future and were too afraid to build it. They were warned by their own prophets and were too proud to listen. And they were torn apart by a culture that rewarded fighting each other more than the competition. The clarity we were searching for is this: Nokia's fall wasn't a business failure. It was a human failure. A Greek tragedy where the hero is brought down by their own fatal flaw. For Nokia, that flaw was hubris, an arrogance so profound it made them blind, deaf, and ultimately obsolete. The laughter in that boardroom wasn't just aimed at the iPhone, it was the sound of an empire laughing at its own funeral. In the end, Nokia was destroyed by the ghost of its own glorious past. Every indestructible phone they built, every market they conquered, became another brick in the wall of their own prison. Their past success became a blinding light, making it impossible for them to see the future gathering at their feet. They fell in love with their own reflection and drowned in it. The most painful lesson from this fallen empire is a universal one. It teaches us that arrogance is a magnificent castle built not on stone, but on the shifting sands of time. It feels eternal and invincible right until the moment the tide of change washes it all away. Nokia's story is a chilling reminder that the greatest danger isn't the enemy at the gate. It's the rot of certainty that grows from within. And this brand of blindness is not unique to Nokia. It's a pattern that repeats itself. Imagine that same sound of dismissive laughter echoing in a different boardroom, this time in Texas. The story of how executives at Blockbuster, the kings of home entertainment, literally laughed the founders of a small startup called Netflix out of their office is a perfect mirror of this tragedy. They too were offered a chance to buy the future for a bargain price, and they chose to mock it instead. That story is a chapter we will be opening very soon. Make sure you're subscribed because you will not want to miss the moment another giant chose to laugh at its own executioner.